Hi, everyone. I'm Mark Henry from Citron Cooperman, and I'm here today with the president of Island Creek Oysters, Chris Sherman. Hey, Chris, how you doing?
Good, Mark. How are you?
Doing well, doing well. Well, thank you for your time. Chris runs a company called Island Creek Oysters located in Duxbury Bay, and they're very well known across the Northeast, but as well as throughout the entire country for farming oysters in Duxbury Bay and also distributing them out to lots of local restaurants. So thank you, Chris. And, I know we're really excited to kind of have you here to talk about the impacts of COVID-19, how you've handled some of these impacts, as well as just your future vision of what you want to see the company do through reemergence, and also just how you're handling some of the challenges today, because there's a lot of challenges with employees, with finances, and I know you've worked diligently to kind of get through these tough times.
Yeah, thanks for having me on. I'm really psyched to share our experiences. And one thing I've seen thus far is that just talking it through is a huge help. So really happy to be able to do it.
So Chris, how have you and your company been impacted so far by COVID-19, and what has been your biggest challenge?
So hands down, our biggest challenge has been the closure of on-premise dining in almost all of the major markets where we do business. So for a little background, we're an oyster farm, but we're also in a variety of other business channels. We are partners in a restaurant group. We operate some of our own casual restaurants. We have online retail, brick and mortar retail. But hands down, our biggest business from a revenue standpoint is our direct-to-chef distribution platform. So we sell our own oysters, but also other shellfish products from about 200 producers to about 1,100 chefs in 42 states. So that's the engine at Island Creek that pays the bills and keeps everything else running on a week-to-week basis. And we've essentially lost 98% of the revenue from that sales channel over the course of a weekend when dining shut down in New York and Boston and eventually all over the country.
So when did you realize, we talk about essential versus non-essential businesses, when did you realize that you had to make some steps in the right direction to change it, or when were you impacted by the essential status, and what did you do to kind of prepare for that?
Yeah, so we're lucky to be considered essential as food producers. So our farming operation and really most of the business is legally allowed to operate. From the beginning, we realized we were going to have to put protocols in place to protect our staff, both to keep them safe from the virus and keep operating, but also because we have some very specialized positions, scientists and production managers who you can't train someone up overnight. So if someone from those teams or multiple people from those teams were to have to stay at home because they were sick, we really would have found ourselves dead in the water. So for our core businesses that were allowed to keep operating, those protocols were really important up front. And luckily our staff was really cooperative and great at moving and being agile. One of the other things too is that we had a major shift in our in kind of where our product was going. So like I said, we had a 98% drop in revenue through the distribution business overnight. And a few things happened. One, we had to let go of some staff that were kind of employed exclusively in selling to restaurants, which was heartbreaking on a team that, we built for the last really 2 decades. But the other thing that happened was a tremendous amount of volume almost overnight shifted into our online retail sales channel, which thankfully we've been building for the last 8 or 10 years. So having to do something that was at the same time familiar, but also very unfamiliar to running what was, formerly 8 or 9% of our overall revenue, all of a sudden as 100% of our revenue through the website required quite a bit of hustle to try to change roles and change people outside of, kind of strictly virus-related changes that were implemented.
Now, that's definitely the biggest piece of kind of the opportunity that you saw. So how are you pushing that model out to people? How are you making people aware that you have this e-commerce? As you said, it was a small piece of your business now. Now it's kind of the legs you're standing on to get through these tough times. So what did you do, and how are you pushing that out to the marketplace?
So the great thing is that we've always really focused on diversification from really before we were sophisticated business operators at all. Early on, when we realized that we had just 4 or 5 staff that were dependent on one crop of oysters coming from one bay, we knew we were in a very risky position. So over the last decade, we've started up all these other business channels without obviously an eye on a global pandemic necessarily, but knowing that we had to take steps to mitigate risk in what is an inherently risky industry. So we've been operating the online retail channel for just about a decade now. And largely from a marketing standpoint and turning folks to that, we've depended on our existing playbook and existing kind of marketing resources. However, we've really benefited from a shift in consumer behavior to people really engaging in a way with eating our product at home in a way they hadn't before. So we've seen just interest and return on advertising spend and things like that. The metrics that we've always had in place have just gone through the roof, and we've been trying to play catch up.
It's phenomenal that you had those bones in place to actually pivot that quickly and be successful through this and kind of see you through. I know it hasn't all been successful. You talked a little bit before about having to make some tough decisions. What are some things you had to do in terms of employees or going out and accessing loans? I know you're well aware of the PPP program, some of the other loans. So what are some things that you had to do to kind of get you through some of these times?
Yeah, so I think we've shared a lot of the challenges as many other small business operators, and we've had the kind of dual experience of having a major revenue channel kind of lay down and die over a very short period of time, but also having to tackle kind of crazy off the charts growth in another revenue channel. So we've been kind of doing two things at once. As far as our strategy with staff, we're a very tight-knit group, very family-oriented, community-oriented organization. So letting anyone go from the team, particularly out of businesses that had so much wind in their sails, just 24 hours previous to having to look at layoffs, was very difficult. However, the strategy that we implemented was trying to figure out and read the tea leaves between the various government programs that were coming out with the CARES Act and different support, both through unemployment benefits, but also for small employers. And we really, thus far, have kind of played our cards right. And we were able to go through and let go of a lot of the staff that were only engaged on a daily basis with the revenue channel that had gone away. So our sales team, various operations personnel, driver positions, people like that. And we tried to emphasize folks that were at a compensation level that they were going to be made, mostly whole by the unemployment benefits, particularly with the federal bump that came with it. And then we kept a lot of key people that would have a harder time on unemployment, and we've kind of made them do both. We've made them act as strategic leads and managers of teams, while also rolling their sleeves up and getting their hands dirty in more hands-on positions. And team burnout has been something we've been dealing with, but overall, everyone's taken care of right now, and our people, our community is mostly whole.
That's phenomenal, and it almost sounds like you have it bucketed off in a few different areas. You have the employees that are essential to the core business right now that you have on. You have people who you might have had to let go for a short period of time, but then you still have the reemergence employees, right? So how are you managing kind of remote work, keeping that culture, right? Everyone's in a different spot, but then also you have this pool of employees that are going to be coming back after this is over. How are you kind of maintaining that culture?
Yeah, I would say not easily. It's been very hard, particularly as a leader, providing really concrete leadership in what is a very trying circumstance over the internet has been really challenging. I'm lucky I live 3 minutes down the road from our main farming facility, and we do have staff operating there. So while I've tried to keep my distance, I have been able to go in at some key moments and get some socially distanced FaceTime with team members. But largely it's been tough, and I've made sure to personally reach out to all of the people who we had to furlough, check in with them to make sure that they are getting their benefits and that they're in good shape. Hear about kind of where their head's at, and that's been really effective. And actually, the biggest challenges have been on the team that's still got their jobs, because they've been working incredibly hard in a dynamic environment. And as an organization and a company, we've been kind of driving the ball down the court so hard for so many years in a really kind of an insurgent, prolonged startup type culture. And now we've been harnessing some of that experience to kind of power through this kind of difficult times, but not being able to kind of see where we're headed as an organization beyond getting through this, I would say has been a challenge from a leadership and a culture standpoint.
Yeah, and then that's kind of a direction, moving forward, right? You just talked about kind of your culture and the things you're thinking about with your employees. So now the next steps, right? It's really hard, especially when you can't brainstorm in a room together. Your culture is very innovative, like you said, startup mentality. How do you kind of see yourself reemerging? What are the steps you need to put in place from, if you're selling to restaurants, what are your protocols? Just employees, right? I mean, we see all the commercials on, safeguards in the workplace, 6 feet of distance. How do you kind of see that going forward? And how do you reemerge from this? How do you get people back, and how do you get people buying from you again?
Yeah, that's a really good question, Mark. And we've kind of moved through this kind of triage phase where we just had to make things run, get the trains running on e-commerce and everything like that. And that seemed hard at the time, but in retrospect was kind of the most straightforward task that's been presented to us with this crisis. Now we're kind of focusing on making the systems that we put in place during the triage phase sustainable for the next 60 or 90 days. And also trying to devote time and resources to kind of game planning, doing scenario analysis on a future that, very few people kind of know what it's going to look like. So we've been thinking about, okay, restaurants are going to open, they're going to have restrictions in dining rooms, and they're going to be running at 50% revenue. Is Shellfish a product that's going to work in that model? And if so, how are we able to best support our chef customers, to get up and running and to do so with our product first and foremost, while also thinking about an incredible amount of receivables that we've got out on the street still to these businesses that are either not open or not going to open, and how to re-engage with them on some sort of payment terms that make sense for both of us. So we don't really have a lot of answers right now, but the big challenge at the moment is just balancing with our team, being able to look at the future, but also continue to kind of work in that hands-on way to get through the present.
Yeah, it almost sounds like you might have your reemergence might be a hybrid of this e-commerce model that is getting you through right now, and kind of, a toned down version of what you once were, with a future beyond that. So with what are the biggest lessons learned, right? So you've been through all of this, lots of changes. We're moving really quick. I think we're on week 6 of the pandemic, kind of working in a different mode. What's the biggest lesson learned, and kind of how do you implement that going forward for success?
Yeah, I guess that's kind of the question of the hour, and I think I can give you a preliminary answer to that, and kind of reserve the right to revise, when the dust settles. However, people has been really a big thing for me, and we have, as an organization, come through some hard times, both self-inflicted and through other negative externalities, but nothing really that that compares to this in the way that it's impacted not only people's life at work, but their life at home as well. So, thinking about and really having to empathize with staff that are in a huge variety of situations, on the home front, and then having them come into what is an incredibly challenging circumstance at work on a daily basis. That's been something that, I've, as a leader and a manager, really, I've learned quite a bit, just on a human level, about helping people to try to get through what is a really challenging time, and kind of working on those soft skills that we all think of all the time as leaders. There's no better time to do it than a situation like we find ourselves in. And I don't think I've done it right necessarily, but I've definitely learned a lot in the process.
I think you said it. We don't know how to lead during a pandemic. No one's prepared for it, but I think clearly you're showing your leadership during this time. And how do you manage financial considerations with emotional situations, and everyone's kind of going through it at the same time? So I just want to say thank you for coming today. I know people will get a lot out of this, and I really appreciate your time, Chris.
It's great to chat it through, Mark, and I appreciate everything you've done for us through this whole crisis. Much obliged.
You're welcome.